Welcome back to Stranger Advice on American Freedom Radio with your host, John Zascola. You know, when it comes to the guests that I have on the show, I enjoy each and every person that I speak to, but just like our good friend Whitley Strieber, who was on just a couple days ago, Linda Moulton Howe is somebody who I greatly respect just for her field journalism work. One of the things that Francis and I were discussing at the beginning of the show in the first hour, as we do often, is actually getting out and finding out these answers for ourselves. Now, just for those of you who may not know who she is, just real briefly, because her bio is extensive. She has a lot of history. But she's a graduate of Stanford University. She's got a master's degree in communication, and she's devoted a majority of her documentary film, television, and radio career to productions about science and medicine and the environment. So the gambit of information that she has researched is vast, and ultimately I have some questions for her, but I've got to thank her for being on the show with me today. Linda, are you there?
Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. Your research, as I was saying before, has across the board really kind of put you jumped in. I would like to say put your toe in, but really you jumped in all the way and learned about so many fascinating subjects. But ultimately, I was hoping to, because we talk a lot about UFOs on the show, and we talk a lot about the phenomena that we don't understand, but there's a lot going on right now in the world that's affecting us even today. And when it comes to laws and bills that are being passed, I know that a lot of people ultimately have their own interpretations of what might be happening through what we read or what we see in mainstream media. But I'm curious, because I know you're well informed and on top of it. What do you think about all of this SOPA stuff?
Oh, it's extremely dangerous, just like the recently signed National Defense Authorization Act that Obama tried to sneak in under the public and media radar on December 31st, New Year's Eve. It is as if we are now in a government in which Congress has ceased to be representing any of us. Congress seems to be serving only itself, its perks. It is a huge problem because this proposed legislation, I'll boil it down to what I understand so far.
Yeah, great.
If somebody called up, let's say a local federal communications office, and said, I don't like Coast to Coast AM. I want that website off. And then there would have to be a formal case opened up, and this new proposed control of the Internet would have another bureaucracy, yet spending more taxpayer money that we don't have to spend.
Right.
That would then go into, quote-unquote, a deliberation that I no longer trust that any bureaucracy is doing intelligent deliberations. They always seem to be politically wired for some agenda. And then
it's amazing to me that these agendas
let me just finish out. Then Coast website or any website that somebody was complaining about could then be taken literally off of the net under a new bureaucracy's decision. And ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America should not go that route. We are already losing so many civil liberties. This National Defense Authorization Act of December 31st, which I'm doing a program about tonight with George Noory on Coast to Coast, and in my January 26th 3 hours on Coast to Coast, I will be doing 4 half hours on news updates that I think are extremely important, ranging from the animal mutilations of horses in England to some amazing encounters by people in Utah with some strange light. And this National Defense Authorization Act and its implications, and I just did a long interview with the senior legal advisor for the American Civil Liberties Union, and I also did an interview with a professor from Harvard Law School. And both of those men are saying this NDAA was not only not needed, but it is dangerous and a threat to American civil liberties.
Well, and what I don't, and I'm sorry to interrupt you earlier, but what I was going to say is what I don't understand about it is, like you said, the need for the actual bill, the need for the law. For why do we need it? It would seem to me that if indeed, based on our past, well, the laws that we already have in place needed to detain someone because of them being a terrorist or such, that we already had really the right and the ability to do that through due process. But this, and of course I've heard a lot of different things about this bill, but unfortunately this bill specifies that they can do it without justifiable cause or reason. They can just come and get you. Is that correct?
Well, let me tell you what I've learned so far. This National Defense Authorization Act that was pushed by John McCain and some of his conservative military force colleagues said that because the United States of America is now in global wars, which is in and of itself an untrue statement, we are now officially in Afghanistan, we are not in global wars. But their so-called conservative impetus for saying that the NDAA needed to go further and Obama needed to sign it was because terrorists, this is like the McCarthy era of communists, when people were arrested and blackballed, when they were just simply called by the Congressman McCarthy a communist. Now, this NDAA runs the risk of the United States government authority, and here is another very, very bad part of this new statute. It doesn't make clear, both the ACLU and the Harvard law professor explain this, it does not make clear anywhere in this new statute who exactly has control over the definition of somebody being arrested as a terrorist and where will they end up. And this is what Obama originally had stated was the reason why he was not going to sign this, because the way it was worded under McCain and company, any American could be arrested and charged as a terrorist and put under military authority because they have expanded the definition of a war zone, a battleground, to include now the United States of America territory. Therefore, we now have a statute that the current president has signed that puts a tension, a conflict, a suspicion between the Defense Department, which is allegedly the final overseer of the National Defense Authorization Act and not necessarily Homeland Security. It makes them, puts them in a position where every American is potentially suspicious of being a terrorist and can be arrested and can be detained. And both the Harvard law professor and the ACLU senior legal analyst said to me, you need to go to the ACLU website. You need to print out and in paper and keep forever in your purse or your billfold the rights of an American citizen. It gives you your rights. It gives you what the police officer's rights are currently under law. And then you should write down on that piece of paper that you keep in your billfold and your purse forever the phone number of your local American Civil Liberties Union office and call them immediately upon arrest. They right now think that this is a bad, a dangerous, an unnecessary statute that has been layered on top of the United States, and that this will come down to is like Padilla was arrested. He was an American citizen. And I bet a lot of Americans don't realize that Padilla was held for 5 years without charge in I think it was a South Carolina military jail. And he was taken completely out of the American legal system. And that Padilla case eventually, whether right or wrong, he finally ended up in a court and he was sentenced and is still behind bars. But here was an American citizen. We have precedent where under the Patriot Act, This American citizen was arrested and held under a terrorist charge for 5 years in military authority and was never given due process. And this is what the legal world is afraid that this new National Defense Authorization Act is going to open up, and the ACLU says that they are prepared to fight in a court of law and hoping that eventually there will be a constitutional charge, there will be a constitutional challenge that the NDAA is not constitutional, and it will finally be dismissed. But how long will that take? And meanwhile, every single American citizen right now in January of 2012 should be on guard and on notice that the United States government is now taking a position, basically a challenging position, against every American as a potential terrorist.
Wow. Let me ask you this. Well, let's say everything goes through and the bill, everything passes and everything goes into action.
Well, the statute is law. No, when Obama signed that on New Year's Eve, I'm sure it was a politically motivated signing. It was on New Year's Eve when most of the United States would not be paying attention, is when he signed. This is a statute. This is not something that is a maybe. This is now current American law until challenged by some agency or institution and is rescinded. It is statute.
Wow. Now, okay, and forgive my ignorance, only because what I should have asked is simply, now that this statute is in, and it has passed, and it is a reality for us, do you think, are they going to start this whole new process of determining who they believe are terrorists? And if they actually go through and start arresting people in that manner through these agencies, where are they going to bring all those people? Do you think it's tied in with all these FEMA camps and all the preparation, everything we hear about?
I don't know, but I'm just telling you, warning to every listener, to every American. Right now, go to the American Civil Liberty Union website. Print out your rights as an American, the rights of policemen, and find out where your local American Civil Liberty Union office phone number is. Ink it on that piece of paper and go with it. Do not now take this out of billfolds or purses. We're talking about survival in a time in which the government is beginning to overburden everything that was once upon a time the United States of America, and there is a bullying attitude on the part of those that appear to have a love affair with military and authority in the Congress. And even though right now this is probably the least justified time, we're out of Iraq officially, we're trying to get out of Afghanistan. Why in the world did these so-called representatives of the people push to get this National Defense Authorization Act signed by Obama that makes every American a potential terrorist? There is something that is extremely corrupt about the process.
Do you have any idea, or what are your thoughts?
I don't know.
What do you think everything points to?
Well, right now we have to deal with the reality. And the reality is it's statute. And that means every American is going to have to stand on their own 2 feet and find a way that they will know any time they would be arrested by anybody that they have to call the American Civil Liberties Union.
Right, and aclu.org is where you can go to. We're going to post that on our Facebook, and we'll put a link on our website. It's amazing to me that things are changing at such a rapid rate. The fact that our liberties are being taken from us, we're having down here in Texas, where I am at, we're having a lot of issues with police who are overstepping their bounds, and really we're starting to see the identity of a police state coming in. And with all the movements that have happened over the last year, with everything that's going on, where do you see all of this leading in the next few months?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll start with what I did at the top of my 12-year-old news website, earthfiles.com. A couple of months ago, I put up from a photograph of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the Congressional Records Office in Washington, D.C. So I went to a website, wanted to see real photographs of them, not something that somebody had done in art. And I blew up the real We the People that is at the top of the Bill of Rights that was signed on March 4th, 1789. This is 2012. So we're talking about nearly 240 years ago, 230 years ago. And Amendment 1, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. And what have we been seeing in 2011, a time of revolution from the so-called Egyptian Spring to protesters in the United States, largely in their 20s, as I was. I had my back beaten with a billy club in front of the Oakland, California Induction Center when I was a graduate student at Stanford University in what was the October of 1967. And we, from Stanford, I was covering as a reporter for the Stanford Chaparral magazine. I was with 5 or 6 guys in my Stanford class. I was working on my master's degree in communications. And we had gone to cover what was Joan Baez had been arrested the day before in a massive protest against the Vietnam War. And we were covering it as various reporters and stringers for TV stations. Right. And when that famous California State Patrol wedge, 550 was the number estimated, that came through to clear out every American student who, all of us, were dressed in white T-shirts and shorts because it was hot. There were no way to disguise weapons. And they beat up people. And I had my back beaten. And today, in 2012, the same thing is happening again. And I'm afraid this time that I don't see the leverage point.
Well, I tell you what, I want to talk about that and a lot more. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. American.
It's practically narcotic.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Earthfiles.com is the place to go. That's earthfiles.com to learn more about our guest. Linda Moulton Howe's with us. Linda, before we went to break, as we were going in, you were talking about your own experiences.
Right.
And not too long ago in history where yourself, you were, assaulted. It seems like that is, when we talk about that part of it, it seems like there's always going to be governments working against, the forces that are out there to do what's good. But ultimately, it's amazing to me the size in which the movement against people like, let's just say recently, the Occupy movement, so on and so forth, and the boldness in which our government is just standing up and saying, we're taking your rights, whether you like it or not. That's why it's really important for us to go to aclu.org. And I appreciate you enlightening me a little bit on this situation, because I don't think ever, at least in my memory, have we had something in our lifetimes as important to address and to fight as this. Would you not agree?
And it's dangerous. As before the break, when I finished out that I don't see the leverage point, what I meant was this. I was at Stanford from 66 to 68. I was there at the time in Berkeley when Joan Baez had been arrested, and the next day, all of us. It was just like a bloodbath, and there was no justification. I just read to you from the. We're talking about We the People, the Bill of Rights, 200 and some years, that say that every American has a right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, and we should not be killed or beaten up or incarcerated or sprayed with poison because we want to assemble. And here was what I meant about I don't see a leverage point now. Back then, I think it is a fair statement to say that my college colleagues, 66 to 68, and that generation, that we were able to halt the Vietnam War, because it was not long after all of the protests on college campuses. For those who have not remembered, Google Kent State murders of college students by National Guard in the United States. I still can remember standing in my apartment in Palo Alto, California, watching television live at Kent State. And this is the day when our National Guard there, under military authority and direction of the United States government, shot and killed college students who were protesting. We had had our backs beaten in Berkeley. They were shot. And I still can remember the girl who falls to her knees, sobbing, crying in front of a TV camera and standing there shaking with pimples all over me, thinking, oh my God, this is the end of our country. But instead, whatever was in the soul, mind, and heart of Congress then, somebody began a movement in Congress against the Vietnam War and stopping the beating up and the slaughtering of American college students who were trying to stand up from one coast to the other and say, this is a bad war and we need to get out. And we, the young men of that age, I knew many, many guys that were my good friends in school who went to Canada to escape the draft, not because they were cowards, but because they disagreed and did not want to serve in that lousy war. And today, where is the leverage point to turn around this terrible genie that seems to have come out of the bottle that Washington, D.C., Congress, they don't give a flip about you and me anymore. I don't know what's happened. I do not know how the United States government became so corrupt, so joined at the hip with corporations like Monsanto that is poisoning the world. And Monsanto has Congress wired, has the system gamed. They are going to prevail no matter what, because now we don't have representatives who care about you, me, and the people, the so-called 99%. They only care about their perks, their power, their medical coverage, and the fact that they will retire with huge benefits. And those are the only kinds of people now who are running for office outside of, perhaps, the wonderful Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. He makes more sense than anyone in Congress now in many, many ways, and it was Bernie Sanders who stood up with against the National Defense Authorization Act. And he laid out exactly why this was a threat to everything the United States has been, and that where we are headed could be basically the final end of the United States experiment as a democratic republic. We, for all intents and purposes, in 2012, have become a fascist nation by the definition of academic political texts in college and high school. A fascist nation is one in which the government is joined with the corporations around money and power to run a nation.
So how can we, let me ask you this, how can we at home, knowing that this is there, this is a threat that is very real and imminent, how can we make sense of our time to oppose this, aside from just, petitioning like through ACLU or obviously getting involved in movements? What would you say are some of the best ways that we can see through some of the hype, stay well informed, and how should we spend our time and efforts between now and whatever happens? Because it seems to me like we're only leading ourselves to this civil unrest that almost becomes another civil war. I can't imagine people actually getting to a point, military servicemen believing that it's their duty to detain people for no reason. It seems that it's all so fear-based. I don't know what to believe. What do we really need to do at home every day to make our changes, to work towards making practical changes for every day?
I wish I had an easy push-button answer. I really do.
It's a big question, and I hate to throw it at you that way, but ultimately, when all is said and done, we hear this and we know this, but what can we do with it? How do we make a change beyond just spending some time signing petitions or spending a little time spreading the word about a movement? Are there things that we can do with our money? Is there things that we can do with our food practically that ultimately lend to the change, or are there any of those kind of practical answers even out there for such a complex problem?
Well, I think that each and every one of us who now knows that we're in a country that doesn't favor us, the low and middle classes, that if there is any chance of finding a leverage point, that it is only in numbers, because it's not going to be in money. The 1%, the Romneys of the world, they are running everything. And it is now an international, global effort. It's the 1% of the world that is running everything. And how does the 99% of the world? In the United States, we can look out and say there's 310 or 17 million people. I can't remember, but I think the last census were something like 317 million. And we look out and know that 99% of the 317 million people that are supposed to be American citizens and are supposed to be living in a democracy, about which everyone now feels cynical and sick at their stomach, because most people know this is not like the country that they grew up in at all before 9/11. But until we are surrounded by guns and tanks that are telling us that martial law has been declared and we are not to leave our homes, we can't go anywhere, and the United States is turning into military camps for crowd control. Until then, I just try to keep putting one foot in front of the other and encouraging everyone that I know. Politics now is nauseating, but I heard a 19-year-old on National Public Radio this morning, and she made my soul lift. It was as if that I was hearing a voice penetrating like a Tibetan bell throughout all of the corruption and crap that everything seems to be drowning in now. And she was appealing to not just her teenage years, but she was standing in front of a conference of what are called bioneers, for biology and engineers, engineering biology to help Earth life survive the assaults that the 21st century and the 20th have been putting on the Earth. And so she was a speaker at age 19 in front of a group of scientists and politicians and a whole huge crowd, and she is single-handedly trying to organize her own age groups into becoming a political force. And I understood exactly what she meant. When you're 19 years old, you can say, I love animals, I love plants, I want the water to be clean, I want the air to be breathable, I would like to live on a perfect earth where everyone was free of disease, had enough to survive, and we weren't in a 1% controlling 99%. But because we're on a political, corrupt planet in which greed and power are the only things driving the decisions now, not democratic systems, you have to say, I'm going to try to start a political movement that will gather up the people in the 99% with more passion, because they do care about the earth. They know that they're losing every single thing that this country was supposed to have been founded on. And that maybe the 19-year-old who wants to start a political movement that, and she gave practical reasons. I'm talking about it in general, and I'm sorry I can't give you her name. I was going to go and research this later tonight because I would like to interview her, but I am saying that there are people at age 19 who are saying the same things that I'm saying today from another perspective, except that when I was there in 19 to 20s, I had my back beaten. But it was as if the idea that every American teenager is spoiled, overweight, wants everyone to do everything for them, that we're in a nation now of entitlement, that no one wants to work, everyone wants everything handed to them, all of the so-called conservative attacks. It's not true. And there are Tibetan bells out there that are beginning to be galvanized beyond those college protests. And it is something about hearing her today, and I thought I would just try to do anything to help support teenagers who want to get together, and she wants it to be global, and say, this planet can change how it's doing everything. We need to change everything. And that, to me, may be the only hope left. Not to do anything the way it's been done, but to get through this awkward and very difficult time period in which it is revolutionary, and that we have to come up with more intelligence and cherish life, not destroy life. If children from walking age were taught to cherish every single life form, understand that some can be dangerous, but you still cherish it, what a different planet this might be.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And to be honest with you, as a rookie broadcaster, I can tell you that it was my whole point for doing this show. I'm a father of 3. I'm a young guy in my mid-30s, and I know that the best way, and that was a great answer to a hard question, but for me, ultimately, the best way is my children, and you wound up right there, is teaching them how to live a better future, so that even if our movements or our voices aren't heard as much as they should be or could be, that ultimately the real change is with the game makers of the future, and that's our kids. And if we start putting those principles and ingraining them in them deeply now, the world will hopefully inherently change, because we're in some pretty tough times. You said, if we get to a point when tanks are rolling up and down the street, with the way things are going, how far out do you think we are from then?
It depends on what happens, because I do think that the Defense Department does have plans for how they would roll out martial law, depending upon an attack from terrorism that might produce a nuclear weapon in a large city. Or several large cities. Yeah. And we know that we unfortunately live on a planet now where the testosterone battles of men who are blinded by egos, whether it's Iran or Iraq or North Korea or Pakistan, where they have the ability to do it and have played a double-edged sword, pretending to be our friend sometimes and really not. So we're in a wicked, wicked political time where, unfortunately, these weapons of mass destruction are in the hands of people who could do great damage, even here. If something like that happens, I do not think that martial law would be far behind. If there is increasing violent weather, let's say that in the upcoming spring and summer, that like last year when there were those massive 600 and some tornadoes in a short period of time, let's say that tornadoes don't let up for 2 or 3 months and there's just massive destruction everywhere, then the government would be forced into martial law.
We'll be right back. Before we went to break, as you were explaining to me, you said something that caught my ear, and you said that you think that it may be possible that there's a plan, that something's happening, and you mentioned, potentially with the scenario of like a nuclear attack on a U.S. city and that kind of deal. Do you think that those preparations really might be realistic to consider?
In terms of the planning for martial law, I think that's been on, we'll call it the Whitman's chocolate sampler of the Pentagon and the Defense Department for a long time. It certainly would have been there when George Bush II decided that we would invade Iraq. And this has been a very, very troubling from 9/11 on, where, as you mentioned earlier, we have the sense, I think Americans have the sense, that this country is in a kind of sub rosa civil war, that it is manifesting itself in the protests, in the Tea Party, in the difficult Republican nomination process this year, that subjects are at least being brought up that need to be addressed about all of the inequities, and whether or not this is any longer a democracy. Does voting even matter? And that we better make it matter. So when you are sitting in the Department of Defense and you run the military authority that is still the 800-pound gorilla on the world, when push comes to shove, their priority will always be to control the masses.
Right. The plan seems to be very apparent. It seems to be just laid out in front of us. Let me ask you this. Why do you think it is that, for the most part, the population of, at least in the United States, are just so, I don't want to say ignorant to it, because it seems like that, like I said, it's right there for us. But why do people go on ignoring it? Why are we still living in this Walmart society where people just really don't listen to world events as being something that affects them unless they see it, in their bank account, or it just isn't, conspiracy? Why are people so numb to this? And do you think that the numbers that are accumulating right now with movements like the Occupy movements and local movements that are happening all across the world, really, do you believe that that's the biggest impact that we can have right now?
I think the first answer is denial. We're living in a nation in which the government itself has made denial, a policy of denial in the interest of national security about the UFO phenomena, part of its intimate policy decisions since World War II. And I have talked with men and women on and off the record who have worked for this government in military or in intelligence. And the policy of denial in the interest of national security is formalizing a government that says lies must take the priority over the facts in order for the government to maintain control. That's essentially what a policy of denial in the interest of national security is about. And one man who had worked in White Sands, south of me, down at the missile range in the it's the Naval Laboratory Research facility there. It's been there since we were developing the atomic bomb in 1945. A lot of people don't know the Navy had a lot of influence and control over what was happening at White Sands. And he told me that he had been exposed to highly classified material about our government's knowledge of extraterrestrial biological entities interacting with this planet for not just decades, for thousands and thousands of years. I don't know how they would feel that they were proved that, but that's what he said. And further, he said that he was either shown or was told specifically that after the three, they were not discs, they were shaped like pie wedges. After there was the crash between July 4th and 6th of 1947 of three wedge-shaped vehicles, one in White Sands, one between Corona and Roswell, and one 30 miles east of Alamogordo. That accelerated President Truman's effort to bring about the Central Intelligence Agency on September 18th, 1947. That was followed in 1952 by the National Security Agency, and that Truman formed what has been variously known as Majority 12 or Majestic 12 of military, science, and business leaders that Truman trusted to keep their mouths shut while they monitored and tried to figure out what to do about a clear non-human presence. And that one of the ways he did this was to sign a classified executive order as President of the United States, placing every shred of information about craft, bodies, back engineering technology, autopsies, under a policy of denial for the foreseeable future that, as I understand it, has never been rescinded to this day.
Wow. That is, I often get ribbed by my friends and family sometimes for discussing UFOs. And one thing that I don't think that they, especially when you look at it from a researcher's point of view, people don't realize is that ultimately this huge story that's often swept under the carpet, this is monumental when considering the decisions that have been made by our government when specifically referring to finance and technology and gold and all of the things that, ultimately encompass that realm and that field of interest. UFOs are really smack dab right in the middle of it since after World War II, like you said.
Yeah, they have been, and during World War II and far before. But the policies set in motion to lie, to officially lie, to tell the world, tell Americans, we're alone in the universe, there is no truth, there are no UFOs, there are no extraterrestrials, while they had the best scientists working in laboratories underground trying to back engineer what they were retrieving from the crashes.
Ain't that true? Well, we've only got a couple more minutes in the show, but I do want to talk a little bit about what you got coming up next. Now, I know in February you're going to be at the 10th annual Life Conscious Expo, or Conscious Life Expo.
Yeah, in Los Angeles.
Moulton, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's going to be great. So you can go on to her website, earthfiles.com, find out all the information about that. And then in April, you're actually coming to my neck of the woods. Maybe I'll be able to make it up there. You're going to be at the Ozarks Convention Center in Eureka Springs.
Yeah, it'd be my 24th year to speak there.
Correct?
It's the Eureka Springs Conference that became a favorite to a lot of us because there was so much breaking news in the Eureka Springs groups and speakers. It started at the end of the 80s, and I think this is the 24th year, and I have spoken there every year but one. And it is fun because it is in a historical Victorian town, meaning it is for real, and they keep it up. And then the presentations at Eureka have always been stimulating. And the whole issue for me is that there's not a question in my mind from people that I have talked to in military and intelligence who say, yes, of course, we're not alone in this universe. Yes, of course, our past history has been influenced, managed, manipulated by these same intelligences, but we can't let anybody in the world know the truth because the world would collapse. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what have we been going through in the last 3 years or 4 years with the economic implosion? I don't think that anybody can hold up that old rhubarb anymore, that the 7 billion people on this planet are going to collapse if they are finally told the truth, that we're not alone in this universe and that other intelligences, I hope more advanced than we are, have been coming and harvesting and interacting with this planet for more than 250 million years.
Yeah, I say that there's overwhelming suggestion that is indeed the case. And as I continue to learn more, I'm more swayed towards it, especially as I see how it's impacted so many of the political interests and events of the past, as well as impacting our future. And I would love to talk to you more about that in the future. Again, earthfiles.com is the place to go. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate. And finally, and I'm very grateful to have you on the show. You are a wealth of information. I appreciate your perspective.
Well, and thank you for giving time.
Well, I'm a young guy, and I don't always have the answers. I'm definitely learning here, and to have people like yourself give me enough time to answer some of my questions, even though they be it long sometimes, ultimately, it's something that I can't, it's my way of gumshoeing it. It's my way of learning from those who I know that have actually done the work and dug for the information and seen it firsthand. You're well-traveled, and there's no doubt that if any of my listeners go to your website, again, that's earthfiles.com, that there's a wealth of information that's important for all of us to learn about,
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And to all our listeners, also go to strangeradviceradio.com. We'll talk to you soon.
No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio.